straight off. Let me take a look at what do you got? I pull into the speculation station a lot. Speculation station.
Hello and welcome to the Speculation Station podcast.
Hello.
Hello. And this is the show where one of us brings in an object,
A mystery object.
and then the other one just sort of thinks about it a little bit.
Well, we ask some questions on
Yeah.
it, and we speculate.
Talk bullshit.
It is mostly talking bullshit, isn't it?
But we're locked in a room,
No internet,
and we're stuck here, and we do the whole thing in one take,
and the only information we have is up in the brain boxes.
so we might be a bit screwed.
All right, well, it'll be fun anyway.
So, let's get started. Are you ready?
I'm going to close my eyes.
Yeah, I'd also like you to present your hands quite wide for me, please.
That's quite trusting. Close your eyes. put your hands
Wider
out.
than that.
Wider than that.
Wider still. That'll do. Perfect.
Goodness me, what's it going to be?
All right. So, I want you to have a think about what that is.
Well, that's obviously a weapon. A bladed weapon. With quite a nice pommel and hilt. Cross hilt there.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a thin blade, feels relatively long. So it's a sword, obviously, and I can open my eyes and see it. Oh my god, it is a sword! And it's some kind of, catalogue. Go to the mall, pick out your... Oh, what do the Americans call it? The Americans call it mall ninjas. Mall ninja shit, where you go to the mall and you buy
That's like
cheap throwing stars and knives.
Yeah,
and...
for me that always looks like a giant paper cut, like letter opener.
Yes, because
Doesn't
of
it?
the thinness of the blade.
Yeah, and it's quite well weighted. For a cheap
what
sword.
kind of letters you could use to open it with? You know those massive oversized checks that charities give out and
yeah.
winnings? If that came in an envelope, you'd have to open
Giant
it.
envelope with a
Right.
giant check inside. Yeah, that's
how long have
perfect.
you had this?
Quite a while. Yeah, it was a gift actually.
Have I seen this before in your possession or not
You
really?
may have done, but I don't make a point of displaying it.
Getting your sword out.
No, but it was a gift. I particularly like if you're the little demon on the hilt, the little
demon on
demon
the
face. Flip the hilt over.
I see. Let's see if the audience can see that. Probably just about, yeah. Demon face works very nicely. There's something very satisfying about having a weapon in your hand, right?
Yeah.
Funnily enough, I was just watching the Lord of the Rings making of.
Awesome.
They're talking about the armory in that.
Is it Wooga Works or something?
Weta
Weta
Works,
Works.
right.
Wooga Works is something completely
But
different.
they
yeah.
had real, swordsmiths and blacksmiths, and Viggo Mortensen, who was Aragorn, apparently became so attached to his sword he took it everywhere, including to restaurants.
I expect he
in New
still
Zealand.
owns it, right?
I think he probably does.
Yeah, he probably bought it off.
I think he wanted to buy the horse he rode as well. I don't know if he did, but he planned on doing it. And even their kind of trailer/makeup trailer, Viggo Mortensen would take photos throughout production, and he put the photos on the trailer and covered it with it, and he wanted to buy that trailer and take it home. I don't think he did though.
So, I mean, have you ever used a sword to cut anything before?
You know what? Actually, I've never used a sword in a sword fashion, let's say. I've done a little bit of fencing at school, but that's with a foil. It's a totally different piece of fish, let's say.
It feels, I don't know. It sort of feels kind of dangerous, doesn't it? Sort of.
Having a sword?
Yeah, and because the only thing, the most I've done with this is sort of stab it into the earth or stab it into a cardboard box for satisfaction.
Sure, of course, as you would.
Outside, especially when moving house, it's perfect sort of thing to do then.
Have you considered sharpening it so it's sort of really dangerous?
Yes, I've considered it, but I also haven't done that because I know. Yeah.
I do know people in Amsterdam who do various martial arts, and some of them have done practice with katana, where you do the proper slice technique across bamboo, and it's a lot of fun, but you really have to be very precise with it.
Wow.
Okay.
All right, let's dive in.
A question.
Yeah. So, I think I know the answer to this question already, but would you be able to defend yourself with this?
Well, actually, that's not a totally black and white question to answer, is it? Because
It might be more dangerous.
Well, yeah, exactly. You think you can. Actually, so since you mentioned it being more dangerous, people were talking about this the other day, that let's say you think you hear someone breaking into your house at night. We've all worried about it. You grab a weapon or like something you've got.
A stick,
or, a rolling pin from your kitchen or something. But the problem is, people say that as soon as you go down to confront someone with it, if they are more dangerous than you and more practiced at being violent, then they'll take it off you and hurt you with your own weapon. So a sword...
incredibly dangerous.
It is really dangerous.
Because imagine somebody just rushes into you and just knocks it into your face.
Yes.
Or just kicks you
However,
in the hand while you're holding
compared to something like a rolling pin, this is harder to take off someone because you've got to grab the blade really, and that's going. If it's sharp enough, it's going to hurt you. Luckily, this isn't sharp enough. What do you call this bit that's kind of recessed down the blade?
I wish I remembered.
I think it's
like
a runnel or a blood channel, right? So I think
it's so the blood can run down it.
Or is it so that when you stick it into someone, you can also take it out?
No, I know what the actual reason why it's there. I don't remember the name, but it's to reduce the weight of the sword while keeping the form.
Okay, and keeping strength and
exactly.
sturdiness, let's say. So I think if push came to shove, I'd be able to defend myself with
you
it.
swing that hard?
Also, there's a psychological factor of, again, confronting a burglar and you've got a goddamn sword in your hand and the light is glinting off the blade. That would give most people pause for thought.
I think you should perhaps practice holding and using a sword so you look like you know how to use it at least.
A friend of mine who I used to hang out with, and we were in the band together, he told me a story of his house being broken into one night. This is back in Leeds. And he sleeps naked, so he came downstairs naked, grabbed the nearest thing to hand, which was a meat cleaver, and he was a professional chef, so he had serious meat cleavers. Confronting the burglar naked, shouting with a meat cleaver. That guy ran for the hills.
As he should.
Yeah, absolutely. And back then,
a naked chef with a meat cleaver is a terrifying visage.
Mason, his name was, and back then he had long hair, big beard, so that's not the guy you want to confront naked with a blade.
No, certainly not. It sounds incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, a blade is a dangerous sounding word, isn't it? To have a blade.
Yeah, it's something people do at the jiu-jitsu club I go to. They do kabudo, which is basically weapons, mostly katas, but where you sort of test out things and you do weapon moves. So one of those is obviously the samurai sword that you practice with.
Yeah.
So I can imagine maybe if you did some of that, did some kabudo or maybe some kendo or some other similar martial art to practice with a sword, so you looked like you knew what you were doing, and then you picked up this real sword. You could be terrifying. You could be...
Absolutely. If you look like you know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Have you seen the historical enthusiasts who recreate what they hope is medieval fighting styles with weapons, and they've tried their best to research and look at pictures, and they've tried to recreate them in real life, which is quite fascinating because, of course, back then, that was the be-all and end-all of combat, was your sword play.
Oh yeah, and I think it was more than combat. There's a whole set of status involved in medieval times.
Chivalry.
Just being able to use a sword. I'm not even talking for poor people. There's not exactly a middle class, but the lower echelons.
Lower strata.
Yeah. The standard soldier would have to know how to use a weapon. Everybody in the world would have to know how to use a weapon in those times. Do you think you would feel comfortable? Maybe this is something, of course, in America where they carry guns, and that's...
some people actually carry swords as well.
Of course they do.
I think in Texas you can open carry a sword, of course.
That's crazy, but I don't think you're even allowed to carry a knife in the UK, are you?
No, knives are out.
Yeah,
you're not
especially at the moment, what with all the stabbings going on.
We're going to protect ourselves against Brussels and Brexit.
Yeah.
Actually, you can't have anything that you class as a weapon on your person in the UK. I remember seeing an old cop TV show in the UK, not that old.
Of course, yeah.
And they pulled over a guy. They looked in his boot, which is the trunk for our American friends. They looked in the boot, and he's got a baseball bat there. And the police asked him, "What's that for?" And he goes, it's just for defending myself." And the policeman goes, "I wish you hadn't told me that, because now it's an offensive weapon. If you'd said I go and play baseball with a few friends on the weekend, fine. As soon as you say it's a weapon, it becomes illegal in the UK."
Well, that makes sense because. I think my wife has talked to me about this, but women aren't actually allowed to carry a pepper spray.
Really? Here in the UK?
Here in the UK. Okay. So as far as I'm aware, lots of women actually use deodorant specifically for that reason. So they've got deodorant in something in there, just so, if it came to it...
And if the police look at you can just say it's deodorant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is it is a weird thing, and it is. I totally understand you going out premeditated with a weapon, but pepper spray. I think there's a good reason to say that, but you could really fuck someone up with pepper spray, right?
Pepper spray is disastrous. If you remember,
right in the eyes,
Johnny Knoxville of Jackass fame.
I cannot forget.
Right. So one of his big things that got him started was reviewing self-defense weapons for maybe it was Rolling Stone, whatever it was, and they tested things like tasers on him, pepper spray, blah blah blah.
Of course.
And they asked him then, and they asked him years later. Very recently, I think some YouTube channel asked him what was worse, and he still says pepper spray is debilitating. It disables you outright. However, there are some people that are used to it, and you pepper spray them and they don't stop and they keep coming for you. But do you think it's right in the UK that we just don't arm ourselves for self-defense.
I think that there's a general rule that it's a reasonable idea, but again, we're an island. It's fairly easy to, stop things pouring over borders.
Yeah, and we don't really have a problem with people attacking us in the street or feeling like we have to defend ourselves against the government.
Having said that, there are a few things recently of people's heads getting hacked off with, blunt instruments and stuff like that.
Sure, but that's a certain type of person who's doing that.
Yes.
The problem we have in the UK with violence at the moment is the stabbings in London.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
There's one yesterday, there was one the day before that, I think. It's gotten pretty bad.
Yeah. So did you think this would be something that would be used, this sword, would be used for stabbings?
I guarantee, so as a practical going out on the street and just stab someone up proper times, no. Yeah. But I guarantee there are some wannabe gangsters in London that have a bunch of swords.
So what do you think about that sort of situation of since we're on the topic of defending yourself, being hard? So do you think that's something that people have a right to do to physically defend
Absolutely.
themselves?
And in the UK, even though obviously, as I said, you're not really allowed anything to consider a weapon, you are within your right to defend yourself forcibly and violently. If you feel like your life is threatened, you're absolutely allowed to. Obviously, we don't take it to the American extreme, like the very tragic case of was it Trayvon Martin, the kid who was shot by... I'm not even going to give the name of the guy who shot him because that is... I don't want to give... Of course,
I wouldn't remember his name anyway.
I sadly do, but I'm not going to say it because he doesn't deserve it. But that Florida's very famous stand your ground law of, I feel threatened so I can shoot someone and kill them.
Now, I'm glad that doesn't exist, yes.
That's terrible. It just basically gives people an excuse.
Again, feel threatened is also a very...
subjective view.
It's so subjective and so wibbly-wobbly. It could change with your mood, it could change with the weather, it could change with absolutely anything.
And unfortunately, in America, where they still have a lot of race problems, I'm not saying we've gone past it ourselves, but we don't have it endemic like the Americans do.
But
you can basically say, look, that young black kid is wearing a hoodie, that threatens me. And of course you feel threatened because you're naturally racially predisposed to think badly of
let's talk hoodies for a moment.
Hoodies.
Because there's been many attempts in many city centres in the UK to ban the hoodie because people and I can understand it to some extent, it can be quite threatening, loads of big teenage guys are walking around in hoodies. I sort of get it, but at the same time, it's just an item of clothing.
Yeah. If you're worried about the hoodie, then you're missing the point of, if you're worried about kids in town centres causing issues, and you truly believe that is an issue, then you need to tackle that at the root cause.
Give them something to do.
Banning hoodies ain't going to do nothing.
It's not going to solve it.
They could turn up in a 12th century tunic and still stab you up.
Yeah, and they'll wear a cape or a cloak or maybe not a hoodie, but they'll wear a Red Riding Hood sort of thing. Yeah, whatever. They could be violent.
I don't think it was Tony Blair. I think it was David Cameron. Do you remember his mantra about hoodies?
No.
It was hug a hoodie. So he tried to turn it the other way of saying we should hug our thugs. Hug a thug, hug a hoodie.
That could be either of them. They're so... Tony Blair, David Cameron, they're pretty similar.
Yes, even though one was Labour, one was Conservative, but like most politics in the UK, they tend to
until where everything's
very divisive.
Even
then, the centre is where it's at in UK politics.
Of course, yes.
But the hoodie thing is it's a middle class knee jerk reaction. Children in hoodies, they must be up to no good.
They're in the mall and they're looking at me funny, or are they looking at me? I can't tell because they're wearing a hoodie.
So on that note, our set of neighbourhoods where I live, like 4 or 5 streets, there's a neighbourhood email chain / community.
Oh, yes.
And our neighbour suggested going onto it because it can be quite useful for things like need a babysitter, can anyone recommend a good plumber? That's great. But what it's mostly full of is, and sadly I don't want to pigeonhole them, it's a lot of women and men of a certain age, at a certain class and a certain racial stereotype.
Say what you mean, please.
Okay, they're middle class white Middle England idiots, and they mostly use it to complain about everything. Like, I heard some guys driving their cars fast up and down the roads last night.
There's a website that focuses on it. I actually signed up for.
Well, there's Mumsnet, which is
but this is different to Mumsnet, which is its whole own thing.
A blight on society, really.
Yeah. But which is sort of like a social media for your local area and your street, your neighbourhood.
Oh yeah,
and it sort of detects where you are, and I went off of it, and there's the good side of it was lots of kind of like Free Cycle or websites like that where people are like, I've got this thing, I don't need it anymore. If you live locally, come and get it, and you can have it, and just advice about local plumbers and stuff like that. All gravy, all that stuff.
Exchanging goods, exchanging information.
Perfect, yeah, all that kind of stuff. And then, as you say, there's lots of people complaining about the way the person puts the bins, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, yes, we all want the social contract to be good. We all want everyone's bins to be tidy and the street to look good and people to take care. But it doesn't mean you have to be a total twat about it.
Not at all, or a twat for the Americans. That's not
I'm sorry, twat is the wrong pronunciation.
Sorry, Americans, you've got the wrong word.
And I know, as I've said before, I don't know if I've said it on the podcast before, but for me, the way the Americans pronounce all vowels is the same, very muddy. Whereas the word twat, I find it very. It's got the less meat than twat
Because it's at.
Twat.
At is sharper, and it has things like wanker.
Yeah, wanker. Cunt.
You know what I've been thinking about recently is the lesser swear words for describing people, like prat and twerp.
Oh, I like prat.
And I was thinking about the American Tool last night. I was watching a film with a character, and I thought, that guy's a tool. It's the perfect word for certain people.
The one I think we should find a way to bring back is Burke. I think
Burke
Burke's
is
got a
great.
good angle.
Burke and twerp.
It does feel like you've got to put on a bit of a Cockney accent.
Oh, he's a Burke.
He's a right fucking Burke, he is.
Yeah, because you're not saying that they're an absolutely terrible human being.
Yeah.
You're just saying, no, you know what, you're just
a bit
more
lame,
populist word.
you
Bit
know,
lame,
got a
bit of an
angle.
idiot. Prat's good for that.
Yeah, I love prat. Yeah, or prick.
Prick is stronger. Prick means
prick's
you've had an
closer to
aggressive
dick.
effect. Yeah, exactly. Prick is much closer. Well, it is essentially the same as dick, right?
Yeah, but it is, but it's much sillier than dick. It's got a lot more. Dick is both positive and negative, I think, but it's all strong and it's all direct and it's all powerful. Whereas prick's got a little bit of comedy in there.
It does.
A little bit of.
What's the word for these things? What's the noun for this? A word that you use to describe someone in a bad way. Do you remember what it is? I have no idea.
An insultative.
Let's say that's a great word. Should we ask Matt what his favourite insultative is?
What's your favourite insultative, Matt?
Probably Nana.
Yeah, yes, you do use that a
Nana.
lot,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
Nana, because it's actually quite friendly as well, you Nana.
I do like
It's
Nana.
a good way of saying that you think someone's done something stupid without making them feel too bad.
All right, on Nana, which is we will jump into the next question.
Oh, we're talking about a sword, right?
Yeah, I know, right? What if it had never been invented? The sword, this sword, or swords in general?
I'll go with swords in general. That has a wider social context, right? It would just be something else. Perhaps instead, an axe would be it would occupy the same mental space in our minds, because a sword is almost the prototypical or archetypal weapon in our minds. Think of a weapon, you either think of a sword, a knife, or a gun.
Well, yeah, and its sword is kind of the rifle of its era, in the sense of it's balanced, it's efficient,
Has
does
a
the
certain
job.
range, yeah.
Yeah, and whereas an axe is more like a minigun, right, in terms of its behaviour.
Yes.
It's a lot more violent, a lot more. Whereas a dagger's more like, a silenced pistol.
Clandestine. Yes, a dagger is the silent pistol of the age.
Something like that, yeah.
Although daggers and small knives are still used, whereas swords are just pretty much.
So, if it didn't exist, the sword, how do you think that would affect us? Let's say, when was the sword invented roughly? Do you think?
Ooh, that's an interesting one to speculate about.
I'm gonna chuck us already. There's the classic short sword / broadsword in the classical era, which is quite fat.
That's right.
And that's Greek and Roman and
Bronze Age.
At least Bronze Age,
Because that's when you start to actually have malleable metals.
even before then. I mean, I assume presumably the Assyrians, the Persians, they had some kind of sword, but it was probably. But the actual construction of the sword is quite difficult, and learning the technology to make it. So I'm not sure when the true sword came in.
So if we're talking about true sword in the sense of a smelted, forged metal blade, that's going to be relatively recent. If we're talking about anything with a sharp edge that has a long length that you can hold, that's quite old.
Yeah.
I know that, for example, I think Mayan Incan civilizations had a long piece of wood into which both sides, or one side, they would embed real sharp obsidian, which you then use as a slashing hacking tool.
Yeah.
And one side you could leave wooden, so you could use it as a club or a sword.
Okay, so it's like a sort of kosh / sword-esque item. It's
Exactly
not,
that.
It's not really a sword.
Probably
though.
not what they called it.
No.
Martha, where's my kosh / bladed edged weapon item?
Where's my blunt / pokey stick?
She'd probably say where you left it. That's the classic response, isn't it? Where's my blah blah blah? Where you left it? My mum always said that.
Yeah, my dad also said that a lot.
Oh, yeah?
So, yeah, very, very, very much so.
Where did you last have it?
Well, if I
Yeah.
knew that, if I was Indiana
Yeah.
Jones who could retrace my steps so accurately, I wouldn't need your help, dickhead.
Yeah, and so it usually ends up when you lose something. Because it used to be something that severely stressed me out.
Yeah.
I lose my keys. I mean, like running around the house like a twat.
Because you're kind of naturally predisposed towards losing small items, right?
Yeah,
Maybe not so much
absolutely.
anymore.
Yeah, well, so I think it's just there in my personality. I'm happy to admit that. But if I lost something, I used to just lose my head, run around the house, not really look, just throw things around, like pick things up, but not really look. I've actually found, and my parents, all credit to them, when I was young and doing this routine, they always said, you know what, if you've lost something, just tidy up. And you end up finding
That's
the
lovely.
thing. Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
But it took me many years to take that on, and it's something and I'm
fair,
very calm about it now.
You still get the same issue. If everything's tidy anyway, and you've lost something, then you look through tidy spots, but it's still, you have to look for something.
Are you a tidy person?
I'm tidier than I ever used to be. I am naturally lazy, untidy, and uncaring in things of hygiene and personal space, whatever.
Well,
but since we bought our own home last year, it's totally changed my life in terms of being tidy. It's really helped me to say, this is actually my house. It's not someone else's. I'm not renting it. This is mine, or this is ours, let's say, in the case of me and my wife.
It was a little before I bought a house. It was like when I moved here for the first time, there was a sort of reset and I started tidying properly. But I've always been quite hygienic. I've always had a problem with dirtiness.
Yeah.
But clutter, I've got a natural affinity for, I think.
And there is something wonderful about the right type of clutter. Like, in your case, books, scrolls,
bits
parchment,
of brass,
maps, bits of brass and bits of metal that you've brought to speculation station recordings.
Yes, and I have great respect for and I do actually quite enjoy the sort of more minimalist design. And let's talk a little on that. I do really enjoy it when it's done well. But for me, if it's a home or a living area, there's something I need to make it. And the term I always use is to feel lived in.
Lived in, absolutely.
That I think really. I like there to be activities of life going on, a cup that's just been left out to show that
or
you've just drunk your tea.
A jacket draped over the back of the chair.
Exactly. Towels hanging up, hanging up over the banisters.
Normal life.
Yeah, I like that.
When we were house hunting, we went to a lot of houses where the actual vendor themselves would show us around rather than the agent. People were always apologising, as they always do, like, oh, I'm so sorry, it's so messy. And it was never messy, and you just say, you know what, it's nice to see what this home will look like when a family lives in it, because that's what we will be like, we'll be living in a home and putting our stuff everywhere. Very few people live in a show home style house. I do know people, especially older generation, people I know, my parents' generation, who have real show home sterile
and
places.
You can't put anything anywhere, you can't put anything down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's too restrictive. As you said, you need
I
to
can
feel
respect it, taking care, keeping something tidy. Absolutely fine. I don't see a problem with that. In fact, I think sometimes taking care of your space is really important. Like, make sure.
Well, what I always think of, right? It's a great expression. I tell this to my language students a lot, which is tidy house, tidy mind. And as much as I'm not a naturally tidy person, I feel fantastic when I'm tidied up.
I do have a counter to that.
Okay.
Which is always hanging above my music teacher's desk.
Yes.
And it was a sign, big sign, and it just said, a clean desk or a clear desk is the sign of an empty mind.
Oh, I see.
So
I have heard that before. So
which is
you've got nothing going on.
I can't remember is it a clean desk or a tidy desk? I don't remember I think it's like a clear desk is a sign of an empty mind. This idea of if your desk isn't messy, you're not really working on anything. And
I get that.
I think, like all things, there's a balance between the two forces of tidy and clean, entropy and order.
I get you, a bit of balance. You know what you can do to fuck with people? If you're selling your house and people are coming around, make it absolutely clean and tidy, sterile show home style, but then just leave a bunch of weapons around, belated weapons on the sofa, I'm sorry, I forgot to tidy up.
Yeah.
Maybe you're a reenactor. Hey, have you ever thought about that? Have you ever been...
I've actually dreamed about being a reenactor.
As in an ambition, or you've had actual dreams in your sleep about reenacting?
Both, I'd say. I've definitely dreamt about it.
Which era would you reenact?
I mean, my ultimate dream would be something like Roman or Viking, but I'd try them all. I think because I'd love to do Viking. We went to a lot of Viking villages when I went to Denmark. And you can imagine just like getting a bow, dressing up in the gear, holding an axe and dressing in the clothes.
Yes.
Come on, that's awesome. Putting on the voice. But I'd happily, and you often see knights and squires. What I would love to have done is, when I was a kid, is just to be a reenactor as the squire for a night, and then maybe eventually graduate to being the guy who wears the real armour and then has to... But I've been to watch natural... And in fact, in the city of Nottingham, has lots of reenactments at the castle.
That's cool.
They do reenactments there.
Oh, yes.
But there's a whole society. There's actually a society. There's society in most British towns. They have reenactment societies. It's often for medieval. So I mean, personally, I'd love to go to Rome or more classical era, but I'd love to do medieval too.
Now you mention it, my hometown of Tunbridge, down in Kent. Don't say Tunbridge Wells or I'll kick you under the table.
Tunbridge Wells.
It is like poison to us from Tunbridge. So we have a reenactment group, and we also have a nice castle where I think William the Conqueror stayed once upon a time. My ancestor, by the way, William the Conqueror.
Of course.
So many people in Europe can trace back to William the Conqueror, like Genghis Khan.
The family's gone downhill.
Hey, he was French. I'm not really British either. I'm quite French and Scottish and Polish and what have you.
Yeah.
But what was I saying? So reenactors in Tunbridge. So they, I think a lot of people do this in their local areas, reenact battles that are appropriate to the history of your local area. When I was down visiting my mum last time in the summer, they were reenacting battles from the Cavaliers and the Roundheads, and and they would take time to tell you between where they happened, how influential it was on the history of our town. I think that's a cool thing to do.
I know they do it in America, particularly around the Civil War, obviously, because that's like the big event, the Civil War reenactment.
And what other historical reenactment and immersion do Americans do? Normally in a single location every year, the Renaissance Fair, right?
Of course. Oh no, which is like really kitsch, sort of
very
pulpy,
inaccurate, full of English accents.
Yeah. People
I'm from London.
They do that British accent that only Americans can do. Even my one isn't very accurate.
Theirs ends up being quite Australian. I'm English.
I'm kind of a British person.
It's generally easier for us to do their accent than it is for them to do ours.
My American accent is not good, I'm happy to admit.
Well, it's apparently easier for Brits to do Southern Americans. So, welcome to the big show.
Down here. You keep to your own business.
Business, I like that, business.
You gotta go say business.
And maybe our audience will remember the classic movie Wild Wild West, where stage and screen actor Kenneth Branagh did his most southern accent possible. Oh, how dare you. It was awful. But it was also a lot of fun, that movie.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to make a horrible admission at this point. Which is I could probably still remember most of the words to the awful theme tune to Wild Wild West.
You don't do it so much anymore, but we used to be able to get you going just by doing the first line or two, and then you would inevitably have to finish it. Let's see if it still happens. Wild Wild West, Jim West.
No, Wiki West. Jim West, Desperado, Rough Rider, No You Don't Want Neither, None of This, Six Gun of This, Buffalo Soldier. Look, it's like I told you. Any damsel that's in distress will be out of that dress when she meets Jim West.
That was excellent.
How do I remember that? I didn't even like the song as a child, but it somehow burnt into my head forever.
Well, once you lock something in, it's very hard to remove it from the memory. And from me as well, I remember film information like nobody's business. I can't remember historical information from school, how to balance a chemical equation. But I can tell you who starred in Hunt for October.
Well, it's a great movie. But for me, I can't remember lyrics to any song. In fact, I'm not, as we've discussed before, I'm not at all into listening to lyrics with songs, really. I mean, I enjoy them when I enjoy them. So why I would remember the lyrics to a song I actively dislike.
Absolutely.
I disliked as a kid as well.
Are there any other song lyrics you remember? Not from
Beatles.
Yeah, Beatles lyrics.
Because I played Beatles songs a lot as a kid. For some reason, my dad used that as a way to get me into. He's not really a Beatles fan, but he used the Beatles as a way to get us into what he thought of as good music with oomph. Not so we weren't into what he considered bad music.
Yes, which was what? Everything poppy, I guess.
Pop, not all pop, but yeah, pop, ballad, status quo, that kind of thing, yeah.
I mean, okay, I get you.
Yeah,
I had confession.
Yeah.
As much as I diss status quo a lot of the time because it's standard 12-bar blues and they pretty much do that every time. I got in the car the other day, Radio 2 came on, classic BBC Radio 2, which is for a certain type of person, a certain age, basically middle-class people, right?
Yeah.
Middle-class white people is perfect Radio 2 audience. But there was a song on, and I was like, that's great. I was rocking out to that, turned the volume up, and at the end they said, that was status quo. I thought, oh no, I'm getting old enough to like status quo.
And now you've admitted that.
It was called Paper Plane. And for our audience, if you know that song already, let us know. If you don't know it, listen to it. I think it's a cracking song.
Yeah, and if you're a fan of Status Quo, generally, which I'm not, I'll admit.
Yeah, you've really got to like that shtick.
And what I mean, imagine you're a fan of Will Smith songs too. I mean, he was very popular for a time doing his raps.
Not just very popular. I mean, so when we were in our formative years, in our teen years, he was doing things like the movie themes for Men in Black and what have you, and doing these quite generic tunes. But I didn't realise until many years later, maybe you know this already, but way before that, in the 80s, late 80s, I think, he was a platinum-selling rap artist.
Really?
He and Jazzy Jeff of...
Good old Jazzy Jeff.
Jazzy Jeff, absolutely. They were platinum-selling. That's why he got picked for Fresh Prince. He wasn't an actor. He wasn't an up-and-coming actor. In fact, he told them when they picked him, I can't act right. He was already hyper-famous in America, especially, I imagine, with African Americans. And his fame went on from there, and of course now he's this massive...
Well, I actually quite like Will Smith as an actor, generally. I think he can be very enjoyable.
I don't know if I think too hard about his actual acting, but I enjoy the movie season. It's like Tom Cruise. There's not much to say about the acting, but the movies are great.
No. I'd say he's head and shoulders above Tom Cruise. He has charisma.
He does have charisma.
And a certain funness to his general performance. Tom Cruise is like a fucking wooden board. You put a leather jacket on him and you just stick him in the role and everyone thinks he's good for some reason.
He's often pretty standard, but he can elevate from beyond that.
Name one movie where he gives a good acting performance.
Vanilla Sky, and one of my wife and I's favourites. Wife and I's? Wife and mine? Whatever.
Me and my wife's favourites I would go with.
No, because you can't say me. One of my wife and I's favourites, thank you, we got it together, is... It's actually kind of an underappreciated movie, Night and Day, with Cameron Diaz and Tom Cruise.
Oh, I've not seen that.
Where he's a kind of agent of some kind, and she gets caught up in stuff. And he's actually, I would dare say, quite charismatic in that.
He's a little bit... I think he was actually better earlier on. Like the original Mission Impossible, I think he's very suitable for the role, and he works
just fine. The Mission Impossible films, in fact, you and I have talked about this a few times before, especially these days, with the Bond films and the state they're in, where it's miserable grey shite with potato Daniel Craig.
Who is actually quite a good actor, but really unsuited to being Bond, in my opinion.
He himself said... After, what was the last one, Skyfall?
I think so. They haven't done one in about 10 years.
He's about to do some. After that, when the press asked him, will you do more Bond? He said, and I don't even have to paraphrase this, I'd rather slit my wrists than do more Bond movies. And then... when they were searching for the new Bond and they were saying, should we have this person, should we have Idris Elba, which it fucking should be. He's perfect for Bond, Idris Elba. Yeah. And they went, you know what, let's go back to the potato. And he went, yeah, all right then, give me my money. That's not Daniel Craig's voice. But
he talks like this, does he? And maybe that's how he talks. And then when he gets on set of this, he actually goes, I'm James Bond.
But he doesn't have... And I think we might have mentioned this previously, but The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was just a far better... Bond franchise movie in terms of tone, in terms of feeling, in terms of even the performance of Henry Cavill was a better Bond. Was a much better, suitable Bond-like character.
Yes, suave, sophisticated, a little bit cheeky,
but also a little bit. He's got a little bit fallible,
absolutely,
a little bit trips up
and
over himself,
morally grey as well.
Yeah,
that's a real fun film. Sadly, that it didn't receive the marketing it should have done to elevate it and put it in people's minds.
It's all right. People are coming back to old movies a lot now, so remake Man from... No, don't remake. Make a sequel to Man of U.N.C.L.E. like 20 years later, set it,
modern age Man from U.N.C.L.E. Why do we keep saying Man of U.N.C.L.E.?
Because we can't talk properly.
Yeah, I mean, the more vodka I have, the less Man of U.N.C.L.E.s I get.
On that note, it's a wild card.
Okay.
Indefinite. So answer the next question without any definite articles.
Oh, no. Okay. I'm ready for it, champ.
So, referring back to the sword.
Oh, the sword!
Yes, the sword.
The sword.
Where might you find this?
You might find this sword in an armory, a museum, or perhaps a private collector's collection.
Private collector's collection.
That's right, a collector's collection. Not just any collection, you twat.
A private collection, or the collection of a private collector. No, wait.
That's all pretty... you had it right the first time, just a private collection.
Yeah.
Also...
A private collector's hoard?
A forge? No, a hoard makes it sound like they're a dragon. Sitting on a treasure. You might find it under a dragon. And otherwise, you'd find it in movies like Lord of the Rings. And actually, what recent movies have you saw? So there's the apparently awful Robin Hood movie with Taron Egerton from the Kingsman movies and Jamie Foxx. It looked like it had so much potential. They had a lot of chemistry together as co-stars, but apparently it's absolutely schlocky terribility. So you find it in movies a lot. And reenactments, as we were talking about before. And I think you'll find I haven't used a single definite article.
You said a single.
That's not a definite article. The is a definite article. Oh, I just said it. Damn.
Yeah, you lose. I win.
That's how it works. I win.
When will a sword become obsolete?
That's weird. It hasn't, has it? It really hasn't become obsolete.
It's kind of obsolete in warfare, though.
Oh, that's true.
We have guns now and like combat knives and machetes.
But we still attach bayonets to the end of our weapons.
Yeah, but it's not a sword, though.
It's a bladed weapon. You still see it on the hip of regimentally dressed, dressed uniformed officers and soldiers. They have the dress uniform on, up to the nines. They look amazing. My brother, for example, who's an officer in the army, God bless him, when he got married, he had a, what do they call it? Matt, let us know if you know this word. When you have like they cross their swords and make a tunnel of people. Guard of honor. Fuck
Guard
you
of
guys.
honor.
You're both. You're lacking. So when you're
all I
not,
can think of is Medal of Honor now.
okay, great. Medal of Duty, Call of Honor.
Whichever, they're all the same game.
So when you're an officer, I believe you are eligible for having a guard of honor for your wedding. And they had swords and they held their swords out, and my
That's
brother and his wife.
Oh, you walked through it, yeah,
At
that's
the end of the
cool.
wedding, that's very cool, and my wife loved it because of
So,
course there's
so
lots
that's
of
a kind of
uniformed men.
gauntlet. It's not like the other kind of gauntlet where you
Where
walk
you're
through
like slaps and slashed
slapped or
at.
beaten up or whatever.
It's a nice one where they say, "Well done, you've married. Off you go." Although it's the army, so it wouldn't be surprising if they did also give you a little bit
It's
of
a little bit sexy though, isn't it?
yeah. And the army likes its kind of horseplay and nonsense.
Yeah,
Most of my brother's army stories revolve around getting incredibly drunk.
of course. Because
And he was saying that if you're, it's just like the Japanese with their work, you know, when they go out drinking with the boss, you got to keep up with the boss. If you're drinking lots, you got to drink lots. So with the army, you got to drink. And if your commanding officer drinking, you're drinking. You can't go to bed. I think my brother said this. Some guy tried to go to bed once when they were drinking, and they went and hauled him out of bed and brought him back to the bar.
I guess it's the camaraderie thing, and it's also to build that sense of teamwork. And I guess if your guy's doing violent things, you're gonna want to let off some steam.
That's true, and booze is a good way of doing that.
Though apparently this whole idea of letting off steam might be utter bollocks in terms of
Really?
Yeah, it might. Psychologically, it might not actually have an effect.
I think it does, regardless.
Yeah.
Even if you think it does, then it does.
I don't. In terms of my own feeling, it's nice. Like I say, I went to a gig the other night. It was the first time I've been to a gig where they play. Like, I say, I ruined my neck headbanging. It really hurt for the next few days. But it was, awesome music. The kind of music I wouldn't necessarily listen to, but the idea of just getting out and dancing, and I felt like I'd let off steam, and I was like, that I felt better because of it. I felt kind of cleansed. But apparently, that's not necessarily a thing in terms of improving your mental
we were
state.
talking about this in the car earlier when I was driving, and some idiot cut in front of me, and I went, "Oh, you fucking prick!" And after that, I said to you, I like to have that little bit of venom, and then once that's out, I let off the steam, and I go back to being calm. But I can't let him get away without some invective.
I think it's just rude.
It is, yeah. There's actually, in terms of letting off steam, I remember a study a while ago about swearing when you're in pain helps. In fact, I watched a documentary that has something to do with how the brain works, and they got Brian Blessed of English acting fame for our international audience. You may be familiar with Brian Blessed in the classic Flash Gordon movie. He's the leader of the.
He's the guy with the giant beard.
And they're the winged, the flying men.
Gordon's alive!
And that's pretty much Brian Blessed's shtick, is shouting and being blustery.
Yeah, and in Blackadder, he's the king.
In the very first Blackadder, that's right, yeah. So what was I talking about Brian Blessed for? Oh, so in this documentary, they had a segment about swearing to relieve pain, and they got Brian Blessed because he's a classic swearer. And it does work. Although recently, my wife was telling me she saw a news article about the fact that even better than that is actually going into a meditative state when you're in pain, which I understand.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
But I still like having a good old swear.
Because the idea of focusing on your pain and whatever, and you stop noticing it or identifying with the pain, and you just sort of you notice it, as it were.
I remember when I
Very
was
easy to
growing
do
up,
it.
my mum, when she made a mistake or hurt herself in some way, and she was around us kids, she'd obviously start to swear, but realise she was around children, and she'd stop it, so she'd go, fiddlesticks.
Of course,
Which is a great British nonsense term, fiddlesticks.
Well, it's basically a replacement for fuck.
Yeah.
Right, but and on the swearing note, there is something to be said about the way our brains actually function differently from swearing, and I read this in a book, I believe, called Filthy English.
Oh, I think you told me about this,
and which I think is both good and not as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
I think it's got some amazing, but one of the most awesome parts of it is it was talking about the fact that swearing doesn't come from the same part of the brain as other speech.
That's really cool.
It comes from the same part of the brain as animal calls.
So it's quite primal.
So the same as a bird going chirp chirp or a monkey going
We go, fuck.
or yeah, exactly. So you can imagine those animals are actually going fuck, cunt, fuck.
But to us, we're going, oh, the birds are chirping. How
Yeah,
beautiful.
but they're actually kind of they're yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's awesome.
So it comes from the same place, it's because it's those primal feelings
It's just
that we
an
have.
utterance, right?
And why is all swearing about violence and sex? I mean, a good portion of it's just about sex as well.
Yeah. Well, not all of it.
It's,
I mean, a lot of most of it. Yeah,
Think about it.
cunt, fuck, shit. I mean, all at least the bodily, the base bodily
Dick.
functions, and the body
so
itself.
it's poo, dick.
Yeah, genitals, bodily functions, sex, violence.
Yeah.
But that it
And
works.
even bastard, when you think about it historically, it doesn't really mean that anymore, but that's where it comes from.
Who is the best person at saying bastard in popular culture, modern popular culture?
Ooh.
It's a British person, British actor.
Bastard.
Bastard.
You mean Sean Bean?
There you go, bastard.
Sean Bean.
There's a
He
supercut
does that
on.
kind of gravelly voice. He goes, bastard.
There's a great bit in the Lord of the Rings thing I was watching the other day talking about the fact that he was so afraid of helicopters, and of course they had to use helicopters for so many of the Lord of the Rings location shoots. And after a couple of times, he said, "I'm not doing it again. I'm not going in a helicopter to anywhere. So wherever we need to shoot, I will get there another route, whether it's getting up in the morning and walking at 4 a.m. to get there." And he did, and they had a shoot where they had to go up on top of a mountain. They flew everyone else up on helicopters, and the cast was saying as they flew up on helicopters in the morning, they would see Sean Bean in his full, Gondorian outfit climbing a fucking cliff to get to the shoot.
Oh, that's
and he was
incredible.
like, "I'd rather do that than a helicopter." But good on him. The fact
Gets
he,
him into character.
yeah, and also it's like you're saying you're taking the responsibility on yourself. Like, okay, I'm being a little difficult by saying I'm not getting a helicopter, so don't worry about it. I will sort it out. I'll climb a fucking cliff if I have to, and he did. I'm really impressed with that.
I think that's brutal. I assume he had climbing experience, and he wasn't just.
I mean, he probably did the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
But in your full costume as well, in the New Zealand sun, it's going to be pretty staunchy.
He's certainly got his own shtick.
Sean B definitely does.
And I think almost no actor can replace him in anything.
Do you have a favourite Sean Bean role or movie?
I mean...
He was great in Goldeneye as the bad
that's
double O
the
agent.
classic one. I mean, I actually think Lord of the Rings is actually one of his best because he was so perfect for a role. He was very born for that role.
Nuanced.
Yeah, and of course people talk about Game of Thrones, but his role in Game of Thrones is basically the same as his role in Lord of the Rings.
Right, okay. I've never seen it. I tried watching him, I couldn't.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. So I think if you like his presence, I'd say for me the one that captured that, because I loved Lord of the Rings as a kid, and that character was the great betrayer. He was conflicted. He added so much more conflict than I ever saw in the book. So much more sort of nuance to the role.
So he actually added a lot more into it.
And he has a fantastic beard.
He does,
It's just like, particularly in that movie, I just think he carries it off so well, so naturally.
My favourite thing recently I've seen him do, is kind of quite different from a lot of his normal oeuvre, was The Martian, where he was a NASA worker who was actually in charge of the Ares crew, I remember, and he fought for them and fought for the idea of telling them what was going on. And I think what was his name, Jeff Daniels, was saying no, we can't tell them, and that was really interesting for the fact that he didn't die in it, and it's always nice to have movies where Sean Bean doesn't die, and it kind of tips that balance over the other side. And it was just, I don't know, it was nice to see him play a normal guy. It's not a fantasy guy or a double O agent. It's just a guy who works in an interesting job.
The thing I noted about The Martian actually was Benedict Wong was just there in the background.
That guy has a really interesting career.
I
turns up
love his
everywhere.
voice. What really actually sold me on him, which unfortunately the series isn't as good as his performance in it, is the Marco Polo series.
I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, because he plays Kublai Khan, which is Genghis Khan's.
Kublai Khan, yeah.
He's not his son, his grandson, because his son was a complete retard. But Kublai Khan, not an actual retard, I'm sure, but just he just drunk the wealth away basically, and ruined the empire. Whatever you think of Genghis Khan and his empire, I'm not saying it's a positive thing, but he tried to bring it back together and sort of was half Chinese. And Benedict Wong in that performance he owned that role. And
That's cool.
And his voice was incredible, and his presence in the court of Kublai Khan was incredible.
Do you remember what Benedict Wong has done of most note recently? What's he in?
Probably he plays Wong in Doctor Strange
and the wider Marvel universe.
The rest of it. And
it's lovely to see him in there.
Yeah, he does a great job as well. And actually, him and Benedict Cumberbatch, there's quite a good.
The two Benedicts.
Yeah, the two Benedicts. But they actually
have chemistry.
They're definitely chemistry, and they both have good voices, rich voices.
Yes, he's very good at giving what looks like an easy performance, and he's just very easy on camera. Of course, that's going to be a lot harder than it looks. But yeah, Benedict Wong, another good British actor to see on the international
he's fantastic,
screen.
yeah.
And we'd have a lot of them.
Yeah.
In a lot of international movies. Well, Cumberbatch himself, or Slumberblitch, as people.
Slumberblitch,
all
yes.
the different variations of his name.
Wumberbatch, yes.
Yes, Slammerbick, Bungle
Yes, or comes in snatches. Yes.
Oh, and as we know, dirty girls love Benedict Cumberbatch.
They do. Anyway, last question. I feel.
Okay.
So I think this is very appropriate.
Okay.
I'd like you to pick it up.
Pick the sword up.
Yeah, feel it in your hands.
Everyone remember we're talking about a sword.
Yeah, and I want you to close your eyes as you do this, and really get the feel of the sword and where it, let it transport you somewhere you've never been. So my question is, can you tell a story about this?
Okay. Yes. I'm a fighting angel.
Oh,
That's
an
what I
angel.
think of. I'm up
okay.
in the sky. I'm in the heavens. I'm a fighting angel. It's the war between Lucifer and God Almighty
So
himself.
which side are you on?
So I start on the side of good, in bunny ear quotation marks. I fight for God, but then I'm taken aside by Lucifer, and he convinces me that actually our side's really cool.
It gives you some money under the counter.
We wear black and do what we want.
Oh, that's cool.
So you don't have to wear those ridiculous wings.
Yeah, and also all the swords in the fight between heaven and hell are flaming swords.
Yeah. Oh yes. of course.
Actually, this sword I can see as being an angelic sword. Obviously, the demon hilt, ignore that for now. But the slender aspect of the blade, I love it. I don't like thick blades. I think they look quite clunky, let's say, and unwieldy.
Because that's like a small long sword. That's what it feels like.
I think it's a real perfect length of a sword, actually.
Yeah, it does feel. I'd say it feels really pleasant in your hands. So, would an angel have a glowing sword?
Yes, maybe an angel has a glowing sword with a holy fire, maybe a blue fire.
Yeah, or is it an ethereal sort
An
of
ethereal
like?
bluish indigo
And then what
fire.
would a demon have?
He'd have a dark red, bloody, fiery.
Yeah, and it'd be like crackling as it burned
Yes, it
and
would
bubbling
be-
off
in
bits
fact,
of like blood and
The
fat.
blade would be kind of brimstone given shape, right?
Yeah, it's a bit too clean for a demon sword at the moment.
Well, that's why it has. Well, if you overlay a bit of brimstone,
I'll just get my brimstone from the shop.
maybe someone with CG knowledge can do that for us. In fact, Red Letter Media, who do their Plinkett stuff and Best of the Worst, they had Macaulay Culkin on recently.
Yes, of course, which was excellent. Yeah.
And during their review with Macaulay Culkin, he's talking about swords, and he's wielding an imaginary sword. And he looks behind the camera like I could do to Matt and say, can someone CG the sword? And like, no. But one of the fans of the show online did like, hey, I'll do that for you. If Macaulay Culkin wants a fucking sword in his hand,
That's
you get
amazing.
Macaulay Culkin, and they put it in there. It looks pretty good actually. But that's CG for you. Like all the zero, no budget movies, fan movies of Star Wars, and people do their own lightsabers. And I was always amazed at like, how do people do that? Only Hollywood can do that. But if you know what you're doing, you can have a little pass at doing that. Yeah.
Lovely. All right, so I think that's a good place to finish.
Yeah, we actually talked about the sword at the end, which is good. That's the
Yeah,
actual
nice
object.
closing point. So thank you all very much for coming along and listening. And it's been
Or watching.
or watching, whatever, however you
Or
imbibe.
just imbibing it through your mind.
Yeah.
If you're connected telepathically with us,
I'm impressed.
I'm
yeah.
thinking a thought to you right
Yeah.
now.
Anyway, so thank you very much for coming along. It's been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope you continue to enjoy.
Yeah, come with us next time. We'll have a fresh object. Next time it'll be my object to confuse him.
Yeah.
And like this time, we'll talk about whatever the hell we like.
Yeah, and if you want to catch more of our videos, feel free to subscribe to our channel. Or
Yeah, we're on YouTube. We've got our own website, thespeculationsstation.com. You know how it works. Use Google.
Go to iTunes, whatever you like. Yeah.
All right, let's clink.
Clink.
Bye.
Bye.
Go away now.
Speculation Station.